what we lost in the Aer prologue. For most of my life I was the angel. That was the story, and I believed it all the way down. I bickered with every man I was ever with, sometimes mean, sometimes explosive. And I always told myself the same thing afterward, that I let it go quick, that I wasn't the one with the problem, that these guys had real evil streaks in them, and I was just the patient one weathering the storm. I held that line for 30 years. I was 50 when it broke. The stage was finally empty. The men were gone, all of them, in their different terrible ways, and I was alone with the quiet and a song I'd heard 1,000 times, and the truth came in all at once and from the wrong direction. I had it backwards. I'd had it backwards on purpose. The annoyance, the fights, the cold exits, none of it was a reaction to anybody's evil. It was a system I'd built to keep everyone exactly far enough away, and I'd been running it so long I'd mistaken it for my personality. This is the story of the 4 years that built it and the 25 that ran on it, and the men I kept out the whole time while telling myself I was the one being wronged. Most of it happened in the 90s, in hotel rooms across 4 cities, with a lot of drugs and a little money and one person I could never quite leave or keep. His name was Shannon. Xanadu, a year before I ever met Shannon, I drew him. I was on the phone with a friend back in Dallas, doodling on a piece of paper, not paying any attention, and I sketched out this hot guy. I'm not an artist. I can't draw. But that one came out, and it came out good enough that I didn't throw it away. I stuck it in a book. 3 or 4 years later, Shannon found it and said, "Who drew this of me? It's so good." I'd drawn his face before I knew his face existed. I still don't know what to do with that. The other omen came in my first couple of weeks in Kansas City, when I lived up north and didn't know a soul. There was a guy I worked with named Eddie, a black gay guy, and he was about to go to jail for a year. His dad had kicked him out, and he needed a place to crash the night before he turned himself in, so I let him stay at mine. We were up late talking, and out of nowhere he asked me, "Do you know Eric and Shannon?" I told him I'd been in town about a week and didn't know anybody. He looked at me and said, "You would really get along with them." A year later, every word of that came true. I never saw Eddie again. By then, I was living in a house with 5 straight guys, and we partied without stopping. When the hurricane closed for the night, we'd bring the after-party back to our place. Shannon and I were the token gays of that whole crowd. Not the gay community exactly, just the fast, fun, mostly straight crowd that ran the late nights. That's how it's always been for me, and how it was for him too, which is part of how we recognized each other. I met Eric first. He was the mayor's son, the most beautiful and most fabulous person in Kansas City, and Shannon's best friend. I'd been seeing Shannon around for a while before any of it. One time I walked up to Eric and said, "Aren't you Shannon?" And he did not love that, because the two of them looked enough alike that people did it. I'd bummed a cigarette off the real Shannon at a rave one night. I was wearing this great white suit, bleach blonde hair, rolling on ecstasy, and he went on and on about how good I looked. From across a room he was the most fabulous, best-looking person I'd ever seen. He looked like the drawing. Thinner but not skinny, tight leopard print or red vinyl pants, big jet black hair, the coolest leather bomber jacket anybody owned. Kids at the mall called him Prince. Kids at Six Flags called him Michael Jackson. We didn't really meet until the salon. Fever, the hippest place in the hippest part of town. You couldn't just call and get an appointment. Somebody had to do you a favor to get you in. Shannon and his boyfriend Troy owned it together, and they had just broken up. The day I was there, Troy was doing my boyfriend's hair and Shannon was across the room working on somebody else. Then Xanadu came on. It's my favorite song of all time. I said it out loud, "This is my favorite song." And Shannon looked over at me with this little look, like, "Hey, I know you." We started talking, and it went straight to the Cocteau Twins. I want to say I'm the one who pointed out that Elizabeth Fraser's voice came out of Olivia Newton-John's older stuff, but it might have been him, and I've spent 25 years not being sure. I've written whole essays on it since. It's true either way. But it's a thing I'm only now learning to wonder about, how much of what I think is mine I got from him in the first 10 minutes. What I do know is that meeting a Cocteau Twins fan out in the wild is, to this day, a monumental thing. It's an instant handshake. It means you belong to the same small world without having to explain any of it to each other. That's what happened across that salon floor, and it was over from there. Shannon was the one on his way out. He and Troy had been together for years and owned the house and the salon together, and now Shannon was selling Troy his half of all of it and planning a move to New York. That was the actual reason they'd split. I had a boyfriend too, a cute kid I'd been seeing a month or two and was never really in. I didn't even break up with him. I just stopped. He came up to me at a club one night and said, "What the hell is going on?" And I looked right through him and said nothing. I feel bad about that. Not bad enough, apparently. Not then and not now. I overheard Shannon on the phone with his friend Heather saying he was going to take Michael on a date that week. I got rude about it fast. Who are you taking on a date? Who's Michael? Because as far as I was concerned, we'd get high and make out sometimes, and that was the whole arrangement. I didn't want a boyfriend. But he started taking me to nice places and spending money. And when he told me he was moving to New York, I said, "I'll go with you," before I'd thought about it for 1 second. We moved in together inside a month. The night it actually turned, we were at dinner at a place called Otto's and got to talking to the waitress, a girl named Brooke, and her roommate down at the bar, a little hippie girl. The roommate's the one who asked if we wanted to do some acid. We ended up on the lawn of the Nelson Atkins, tripping out of our minds under the most beautiful windy sky there ever was. That's the night Shannon told me he loved me. My first thought, clear as a bell, was, no, this isn't going to happen. And then I caved anyway, that night, or close to it. Our first fight came not long after. I had his Jeep, and I didn't come back when I said I would. I don't even remember where I was, but it was disrespectful, and he was pissed, rightfully so. I remember exactly what went through my head while he was going off. It wasn't, this is going to happen forever. What I thought was, if we could just never have this first fight, it would be perfect. Like the fight was the thing wrecking it, and not me. I believed that for about 30 years, the gypsy years. We moved to New York for about a year, then Atlanta for the '96 Olympics, then Dallas, then back to Kansas City, where we'd started, 4 cities in 4 years, a big slow loop that ended exactly where it began, which should have told me something and didn't. The whole time we lived in small hotel rooms, we never had money. We got fucked up. 2 extremely social people with nothing but each other and a city full of strangers we'd turn into friends inside a week. The stories from those years are endless. I could fill a second book with nights I only half remember. But the thing that matters most about that whole stretch isn't any single night. It's the CDs. We had hundreds of them. Music was the entire language between us, from Xanadu forward, and over 4 years our 2 collections stopped being 2 collections. They became one pile, and you couldn't have told you whose was whose. It was the same with everything else. The clothes, the books, the little junk you pile up living on top of another person in rooms barely big enough to stand in. That pile is the reason we didn't break up sooner. I knew we should. I'd known it a long time. But every time I got close to it, I'd picture actually separating all of it, sorting hundreds of discs back into his and mine, untangling 4 cities' worth of one life back into 2, and the exhaustion of it made staying together the easier thing. We'd just fight about who got what, and I knew it, so we stayed. People like to think love is what keeps you somewhere. Sometimes it's just logistics, the balanced ledger. There was a time in Atlanta, the summer of the '96 Olympics, when we tried to break up. There was a guy named Chris who sang at Six Flags, had his own show out there. He was into me and he asked me out and I wanted to go, so I brought up breaking up to clear the way for it. The date happened. Shannon came along on it. That was the end of that. When it was time to move from Atlanta to Dallas, Shannon and Eric went ahead a few days early on the bus. I stayed behind, and while I was back there, I made out with Chris. Then my dad drove me down to Texas. By the time I got to Dallas, Shannon and Eric already had an apartment and a whole life going with people I'd never met. We were technically trying to work it out. And the next morning, Shannon was supposed to meet my mother for the first time. He didn't show until hours late, wrecked, still in his clothes from the night before. The first time he's meeting my mom, and that's what he does. I was furious. It was humiliating. Years later, after the angel in the living room, after we'd gotten back together again, he told me that night was the one and only time he ever cheated on me. He'd been with a guy. I carried that for 30 years. It was the cornerstone of the whole case against him. The cleanest piece of proof I had that he was the one with the evil streak, and I was the one getting wronged. It wasn't until I was 50, going back over all of it, that the math finally did itself. A week before that morning, back in Atlanta, I had made out with Chris, and I never told him. I don't think he ever asked, because I wasn't a cheater. That wasn't my reputation, so it never even made it onto my own ledger. I'd spent 3 decades nursing the wound of him showing up late to meet my mom, and I had completely buried the fact that I'd done the same thing to him a week before and simply decided it didn't count. We were both burning the house down. We just lit it from opposite ends, and I only ever smelled his smoke. Ross Avenue. We broke up plenty of times. One of the ones I remember best was in Dallas when we were dealing drugs. I'm not proud of it, but that's what we were doing. A friend of mine met Shannon, someone who didn't know him at all, spent a little time around him and came back and told me, "You need to leave him." I'd already half decided he was cheating anyway. He'd do these mean things, act like he was messing around, and even though he swore later, he never did. And I believed him. At the time, it felt like proof. So we broke up. I moved into a weird house in a bad part of East Dallas, where my bed was the living room. There was a homeless old black man who turned up at that house. My roommate let him use the place to get cleaned up. I came home one afternoon and he was just sitting in my living room, in my space, and I said hello and we talked a little. He was profound in a way I couldn't account for, said a couple of things that landed too hard for a stranger, and then he was gone. I didn't think much of it except that it was strange. Shannon, meanwhile, had fallen in with a crew run by a guy named Beef. The whole group gave off evil cult energy, and Beef gave me bad vibes specifically. They drove a couple hours south to a rave, and Shannon came back with acid on sugar cubes and handed me 1 or 2. Everybody I knew was at that rave. I wasn't. I sat in that house bored and sad, and finally I took a hit, and it came on harder than anything ever had before or since. So I went walking around Dallas by myself, out of my mind. I was headed to my friend Lizzie's, but I was tripping too hard to walk up and talk to a person, so I sat at a bus stop across Ross Avenue with an ice cream, trying to come down enough to function. And a black cat the size of a small dog came tearing across 4 lanes of traffic straight at me. The biggest cat I have ever seen. I was sure it was going to attack me. It jumped into my lap, and we sat there petting each other, having this completely real connected moment. 4 lanes of cars going by. The day before, I'd called Lizzie from the payphone across the street and asked what she was up to, and she said, "I'm giving Death a bath." I thought it was the funniest thing I'd ever heard. I'd never met her cat. So I sat there on that bus stop and decided that if this giant cat didn't run off in 5 minutes, I'd carry it over to Lizzie's because she was a cat person. I picked it up, walked it to her door, and the second she opened it, the cat shot inside. I started apologizing for hauling a strange animal into her house, and she just said, "Oh, Death." It was her cat. I'd spent the whole afternoon holding Death in my arms and didn't know it. While I was there, some friends dropped Shannon off. He'd taken too much acid at Beef's rave, plus something else, and he was in real trouble, a true medical emergency, and they knew I was at Lizzie's, so they brought him to me. Once he leveled out, we went back to my place in East Dallas. The old man was there again. He sat down with the 2 of us, and for about 10 minutes said the most profound, beautiful things anyone has ever said about us, about what we were to each other. And then he got up and walked out, and we never saw him again. We were completely sure he was an angel. There was no other explanation we wanted. So we got back together. That was the whole pattern. A cat named Death would run across 4 lanes to find me. A stranger would appear in a bad neighborhood to bless us and then vanish, and we'd take it as the universe casting a vote. We were never once short on signs that we belonged together. What I never noticed was that the signs only ever showed up to glue back together a thing the two of us kept breaking on purpose. The Matrix and the Mirror. We knew Luke for about a year before we ever met him. He was Lizzie's best friend, an animator in New York on a kids' show everybody's kid has seen, and Lizzie kept telling all three of us we'd be obsessed with each other the second we were in a room together. She was right. He'd come through town and we'd party. We drove down to Austin once, and the three of us just fit. Shannon and I fought like it was a part-time job, but never when Luke was around. Something about him kept the peace. Shannon wouldn't do it in front of him. Luke and I flirted, but it was innocent. It was easy, and nothing in my life back then was easy. He was handsome like an actor. Designer everything, Louis Vuitton duffels, that New York gloss you could spot across a parking lot. Some cops in the city had tackled him over a joint when it was still a real charge, wrecked his back, and he'd come out of it with a $50,000 settlement and a standing prescription for Dilaudid. So he moved home to his grandparents in Dallas, and that's how we started seeing him every time we were at Lizzie's. And then, for a few days, he just moved in with Shannon and me at my mom's place in South Dallas. We were all so in love with each other, we talked about a threesome and then decided it would be too weird. My mom adored him. My little brother adored him. For a few days, the house was the best it ever was. The Matrix had just opened, and we'd all gone to see it the night before. Luke could not shut up about it. The whole next day he kept saying he was going to change the Matrix. Not the movie, the Matrix. He paced around the house saying it. We all thought it was funny. He'd been off the Dilaudid about a week at that point, which I think was part of why he'd come to stay with us. But that afternoon he went over to his grandparents and brought the rest of the bottle back because we had a party to go to that night. We were getting ready, and he came out of the bathroom and he was just gone. Couldn't work his hands. He sat down and had me tie his shoes for him, and I remember thinking, what is his deal? What is wrong with him? I was naive at that whole category of drug. I'd done plenty of uppers, ecstasy, liquor, weed, but I had no idea what a downer did to a body. None. We took Luke's convertible. Top down, always. Shannon drove because Luke was too far gone to, and Luke sat in the middle. Somewhere on the way the drug hit him in this big warm wave, and he had an erection, and he took my hand and put it on it, not as a come-on, just so I'd feel how good he felt, like he wanted to give me some of it. Shannon noticed, and he didn't like it. It didn't turn into anything. I told him it was no big deal, and he let it go, but he said something about it. That's the part that's sad now. He was bothered, and I waved him off, and he understood, because that was where we lived. The party was at Clay's, a fancy place in a nice neighborhood right on a busy street. Clay, we figured out years later, was a secret Freemason. The room was boho before boho was boho. Maybe 10 people, more of a dinner thing than a party. Luke stopped me at the front door and said, "Don't let me go to sleep." I didn't get it. We're at a party. Why would you go to sleep? Inside of a few minutes he was out cold. Clay and I carried him into a back living room and laid him on a sofa so he could sleep it off in peace, and the rest of us stayed up all night. Around 10 the next morning, the sun was up, and it was one of those beautiful sunny spring mornings in Dallas. Luke's car was out of gas. I went into the back room where he was sleeping and took some money out of his wallet, and I remember he was snoring kind of funny, and I didn't think a thing of it. I walked down to the gas station with a plastic milk jug. I remember that walk specifically, which is strange because nothing happened on it. Just the light and the air and me feeling fine, high in an easy way, taking my time. I filled the jug and I walked it back in the morning sun, and I poured it into his car. Then I walked back into the house. Everyone was standing in a circle in the back room. Lizzie was down on her knees over the sofa holding a mirror under Luke's nose. He had stopped breathing. We got him to the hospital as fast as a car can move. The last thing I ever did for him was put gas in a car he was never going to drive. He was brain dead before anyone would say the word. His eyes stayed open the whole time, just open, pointed at nothing. For about 10 minutes it was me and Shannon and Lizzie standing over him, begging him to come back, telling him we'd take care of him. We'd take care of everything. Just come back. He didn't. After that there was nothing left to do but wait for his family. That's when I left. I told them I was going to go smoke or get something to eat, maybe. The errand I handed myself was to drive back to the house for the rest of his pills and bring them to the doctors, like it mattered, like it would change a single thing. I think the truer reason was that I wanted the pills out of the house. The cops had the convertible by then. It was a death. There were questions, and the empty milk jug that still smelled like gas was part of it now. So I took a different car, and I think the rest of the truth underneath all of that was that I just needed to be gone. I needed to be by myself. So I left Shannon standing in the worst room of his life, and I drove off. I don't remember what I did after that. When I got to the house, my mom was home. I got the pills. By the time I made it back to the hospital, she and my grandmother were there too. Shannon looked at me and said, "I can't believe you left me." I was sad too. We ended up with Luke's convertible for a few weeks after he died. The police were done with it, and his grandparents told us to keep it for a while. The funeral was theirs, a Christian thing, and it was awful in the specific way those can be. His cousin sang some terrible Christian song, and my mom and Shannon and I could not stop laughing about it, the way you do when the only other option is worse. The tombstone said Jamie Daniels. That was his real name, the one he was born with, before he was ever Luke. They buried the version of him his family knew, never the one we did. Lizzie got up and read something from Blake, dark as hell, and that part was right. His grandparents were so sweet through all of it. We had all his things. His computer, we were really trying to get into it. And the check was there too, the settlement in Shannon's name, sitting at my mom's house. We could have cashed it. For a minute there we were headed that way. His grandparents made a point of telling us not to open that check, and it took us a while to understand why. Because we could have. Because nobody was going to stop us. Luke's whole plan had been the three of us moving to New York on that money. With him gone, his grandparents offered to take us on the trip anyway, to New York, like he'd wanted. We just looked at each other like, what's the point? We gave the car back. We gave the check back. We gave all of it back. Then my mom and my grandmother rented a U-Haul and drove us the other way, back to Kansas City. Dallas was done. I don't know how to say it better than that. It was just done, and it was sad. Brothers. The romance ended the way I end most things, which is to say I withdrew until there was nothing left to stay for. I stopped sleeping with him. I wasn't attracted to him the same way as he got older, and instead of handling that like a person, I just shut it down. He told me, if you won't have sex with me, I'll find someone else. I said, fine, do that. And eventually he did. His new boyfriend was named Chad, though I called him C-Had. He was a blob with no personality, a guy Shannon could mold into whatever he wanted, and when I said so, Shannon agreed, and we laughed about it together. We actually split up over it, except we still lived together, and then we moved again together, and finally I got my own apartment, which is the only thing that ever really separates two people who can't stop orbiting each other. I was jealous at first. I couldn't believe he had someone else, as if I hadn't handed him the idea myself. But it passed fast, and then it was just funny. The two of us sitting around laughing about the man who was supposed to be his actual relationship now. That was the tell I couldn't read at the time. Everyone told me I seemed so much happier once we broke up. And I was. The day-to-day administration was over. The bond didn't go anywhere. We were brothers after that. Closer than I've been to anybody, for what turned into a quarter of a century. We'd broken up and gotten back together so many times by then that we'd long since decided the universe just wanted us together. And after a while, that was easier to believe than to keep asking why. It really was pure magic. He'd have told you the same. Hawaii. I moved to Hawaii a couple of years after Shannon and I split for good. By then the love of my life was a man named Ryan, who was married to my best friend. Its own long story, and not this one. And out on the island the whole thing was coming apart. And I was coming apart with it. So I called Shannon. He was the one person on earth who could get my head back on straight, and he knew it. And he came. 3 or 4 years after I'd landed there, he packed up his life and moved across the Pacific because I needed him. That's the thing about us I keep having to say out loud to myself now. When it actually counted, he showed up. I called, and he crossed an ocean. Eric and Chad came out a few months after he did, and for a while the whole old Kansas City constellation was just transplanted onto an island. Shannon, Eric, Chad, our best friends, me. Those were some of the best years there were. There was one shadow over all of it that I didn't understand until much later. Before Eric and Chad came out to join us, while Shannon was in Hawaii with me and the two of them were still back in Kansas City, Chad slept with Eric. Eric was HIV positive. He would die of it eventually, years after all of this, long after Hawaii was over. Chad got it from him then, though none of us knew for years. It didn't surface until much later, back on the mainland, when Shannon and Kent had gotten together and Chad called Shannon out of nowhere to tell him he was positive and where it had come from. For Shannon, it was a scare. He'd been with Chad, but he was okay. Chad stayed in Hawaii after the rest of us scattered. As far as I know, he's still there. Shannon left a few years before I did. I nearly made the full 10 years out there, and when he threw his going-away party, I didn't go. I was mad that he was leaving. That was the whole reason. He was leaving and I couldn't take it, and I stayed home. He and our best friends took turns calling me every 10 minutes the whole night, passing the phone around, trying to get me to come say goodbye to him. I let it ring every 10 minutes, all night, the people who loved me most trying to put me in a room with the man who'd moved across an ocean because I asked him to, and I sat there and let it ring. He crossed the Pacific for me. I wouldn't cross town to say goodbye. He was leaving, so I left first. Alabama, I moved back to Kansas City because Shannon was there, and because being near him felt like being near family, even though he wasn't, technically. My actual family was down in Texas. The plan was to move in with him. That didn't work out, which by then was the most predictable sentence either of us could say about the other. So I got my own place and we saw each other a lot. Just the right amount, finally, after all those years. By then, Shannon was dating a trust fund kid named Kent, a dead doctor's son, a genuinely nice guy. When he started seeing Kent, Shannon quit working. This was a man who had been a phenomenal hairdresser, who'd cut hair all over, including New York, on things I can't get into here, who'd always had a clientele that would follow him anywhere. And he just stopped. He'd wake up every morning, get a 6-pack of Colt 45 and a handful of Fireballs, and drink the day down, living off Kent's money. It wasn't a lot of money. It was enough. He started turning up at my work after my shifts, already wrecked, angling for free food, and it annoyed me. There was a stretch, 4 or 5 months, where I didn't see him at all. He was going through his own thing. They'd moved north of the river. There was always some drama, and my own life was finally quiet and peaceful. So I kept my distance. That's the move I keep making. It's the whole reason there's a book. Even at the end, with him going under, my first instinct was to stand back and protect the quiet. He showed up at my work one day with Kent and said, "Hey, Michael, tell Kent it's okay if this guy I met online comes and sees me while Kent's away on his family vacation." I said, "No, that is absolutely not okay. What are you even talking about?" There was some man he'd met in a chat room, a horror site, something like that, who he'd been talking to. Shannon always went on the family vacation with Kent's people, but this time he wasn't invited because they'd had it with him refusing to work and the trust money was running thin. A little while after that, he called me at 2 a.m. and said he was coming over. He came over and we hung out and did tarot cards, and my dog trotted up and dropped a dried-out dead rat in his lap, something that had been mummifying up in the attic. Just our normal good time. And somewhere in the night he told me I needed to start preparing myself for him to die. I told him to knock it off. That's so negative. That's crazy. He said his legs hurt. I said, then go to the doctor if you really think something's wrong. But quit thinking like that. You're going to be fine. That was the last time I saw him. The next day he took the little bit of money I'd given him that night, and the guy from the horror site drove up from Alabama and got him, and they left. Just like that. People kept coming up to me. Shannon moved to Alabama? What? And I barely knew more than they did. We talked a couple of times. He told me he was about to open an apothecary, and I told him he'd watched Practical Magic too many times. The last message I ever got from him said he'd quit drinking and was going to stop smoking soon. About a week later, I was walking to work, and a feeling of dread came over me, so heavy that I was certain somebody had died. I thought it was my mom. It did not once cross my mind that it could be Shannon. That was so far outside the realm of possible that my brain didn't even reach for it. That night Kent called. Shannon was in the hospital. The whole story came third hand, from the Alabama guy to Kent to me, that he'd been sick for a couple of days, that he went to the bathroom and was bleeding, and then there was blood coming out of his eyes, and he had a heart attack in the ambulance and died later. I don't know what really happened in that hospital or in that house. The man he left with was strange in a way I never trusted. There's a part of me that has always half believed the two of them were into something dark that finally turned back on them, like a bad episode of a show I grew up on. I never liked him. At the funeral, people treated him like a kind of widow, and he tried hard to talk to me, and I never let him. But I understood exactly what he was, standing there. He was what I had been, with Luke, the one who was in the room at the end, and I wasn't. For Shannon, I wasn't in the room at all. I was a week away with a bad feeling, telling him on the phone to quit being so negative. Then the men were gone, all of them, and the stage was empty, and I was 50 years old and listening to Purr. It's a Cocteau Twins song, and for as long as I can remember it was a song from me to him. We'd get high and put it on and cry, both of us, and the whole time I understood it as me holding space for him, me being patient with him, me loving him through whatever he was. We're feeling the same thing, I always thought, same frequency. It hit me like a brick. It was the other way around. It had always been the other way around. The song wasn't my patience with his anger. It was his patience with mine. He was the one who was never afraid of me, who kept showing up, who held the space and waited for me to figure it out and never once stopped, for 25 years, while I called it brotherhood and kept just enough distance to stay safe. The truth came in all at once. About that song, and about every fight, every cold exit, every time I waved him off. I'd had it exactly backwards, and I'd had it backwards on purpose, because the story where I was the angel and these men had the evil streaks was the story that let me keep everyone at arm's length and feel righteous doing it. The bickering was never a reaction to anything. It was the alarm system. It went off the second anyone got close to the door. And it wasn't all armor. That's the part I can't let myself flatten. There are pictures of the two of us spread across all 25 years. Hawaii, my head down on his shoulder, and then 10 years after that, a year before he died, the same exact pose, his head on mine, like no time had passed at all. Whatever I thought I was protecting myself from, I still spent a quarter of a century close enough to fall asleep on him. Both things were true at once. That's the whole problem, and it's the whole point. The guilt sorts itself into two piles, and 30 years on I still can't tell you which one is heavier. The first is Luke. The morning I took money out of his wallet and heard him snoring funny and didn't understand that the funny snoring was a man leaving the world. If I'd known what I was hearing, maybe. The other is Shannon, and it isn't one moment. It's all of them. I left him standing at Luke's deathbed to go be by myself. I wouldn't cross town to his going-away party while he and everyone we loved called me every 10 minutes all night long. And when it was finally his turn to die, I wasn't in the room, wasn't in the state. I was a week away with a bad feeling I mistook for something else, telling him on the phone to quit being so negative. He crossed an ocean the one time I asked him to. Every time he needed me in the room, I found the door. There's a photograph my friend Chelsea took near the end of Dallas before Luke died. Shannon and I are sitting on a bed. He's in a white shirt, turned toward me, watching me, and he looks sad, small and sad in a way I never let myself see while he was alive. I'm in a Harley-Davidson shirt with Mount Rushmore on it, drinking out of a glass, eyes down, giving him nothing. The look on my face isn't sinister, exactly. It's conniving, tricky. The face of a person working an angle, keeping a card back. For 30 years I remembered myself as the one who got hurt in that room. The camera remembered it the other way. The camera had it right.